Vivian's joining us on Zoom.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
So you won't see, well, you'll see them after we stop sharing. Yeah, thank you. All right, thanks everyone for joining us. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and boards and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, you can visit our website. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before they're allowed to speak online. If you're joining us in the Zoom webinar this evening, when it is time for the public hearing items and public participation, you may raise your hand if you wish to speak. You can do this by you can hover your mouse over the raise hand icon. I don't think we have anyone on the phone, so I won't go over that. Another way to do this is to also click on the reactions button and click the raise hand, and we will see you. And when it's your turn, we'll call upon you to speak. And that's it. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And this is my first time chairing in person, so forgive me if I get a few things wrong. This is our opportunity for public participation. Do we do online folks first?
Chair, before we get too far into public participation, we'll need to do a roll call.
Oh, we haven't done that before.
Yeah, so
I
just a roll
haven't
call.
done that before.
Yeah, just to say who's here and who wasn't here
All right, so
for the record.
does someone else do the roll call? Everyone just gives their name.
I think everyone can just give their name.
Okay.
Laura Kaplan.
Mark McIntyre.
Sarah Silver.
ML Robles.
Kurt Nordbeck.
Great, thank you.
We're good? Okay.
And
All right.
to answer your question, we typically have been taking in-person public comment first and then online.
Okay, so if anyone wants to speak to any item that is not on our public agenda tonight, you are welcome to step forward and you have 3 minutes to speak. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment? Seeing no one stepping forward, Amanda, is there anyone online?
Yeah, it looks like we have one online so far. Vivian, will you help us with that?
Sure. Lynn Siegel, your hand is raised. I see you have 3 minutes, and if others would like to speak, please also raise your hand so that we know. Go ahead, Lynn.
Could I blow my nose? I just got off my bike.
Sure. We'll hold it for a couple seconds.
Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Well, first, 2 things. One local and one international, and both of them affect how the planning board functions and operates and serves the community. One, on the 14th of September, my computer bag was stolen at the municipal building in the lobby. Not 30 seconds after I removed my computer from the bag by an employee. I didn't even know this for 2 months, but the surveillance cameras that you and I have paid for caught the thief, who is in the children's department of the library. His story was that he thought it was his boss's and he took it for her. And then when it was given to her, she left it outside the building when there was a fire alarm intentionally after she accepted it. This is just not acceptable. I was sure it was a homeless person, but it was our own city employee. And I'm paying, they're paying me the $400 or $500 that I lost, but that's the risk and security fund. And that's my money that I'm paying myself back for. And this employee had no repercussions, was not prosecuted, doesn't have to answer to me, doesn't, I want to see him, but he doesn't want to see me. There's no mediation, there's no restorative justice, there's no community policing in this town. And that really affects the planning board, because when we don't have a strong community here, we don't have law and justice. We don't have a community with any backbone. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is the situation in Gaza, because there's no use in having a planning board at all if we're going to have a 9/11, worse, much worse than a 9/11, many 9/11s all over the United States in random cities like Boulder, Colorado, because we have got people, the Hamas people are humans too. They were just babies when they were affected the same way that the babies and the pregnant people and the little kids are affected now in Gaza. They were affected that same way, and that's what they became, Hamas. They were angry. They lost their parents. They lost, I mean, I heard one kid had its hand shut off and it said, I want to shake my hand. I want to use my hand. I mean, this is just appalling what's going on. The proportions are inappropriate, you know, huge disproportion of force. So do something, because it's all about the planning board and the survival of this city.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you very much, Lynn. Is there anyone else online?
No, nobody else. Back to you, Chair.
All right, thanks very much. All right, we're now going to move to discussion of dispositions, call-ups, and continuations. First is floodplain development permit FLD 2023-00033, 3360 Broadway. It's a fence located within a conveyance zone. Does anyone here want to call it up? Have any questions or want to call it up? All right, that's a no. We will move on to item B, floodplain development permit FLD 2023-00028, Goose Creek Junction Place to Foothills Parkway, Goose Creek Channel Improvements Phase 2, Junction to Foothills. Does anyone have any questions or want to call it up? ML?
Thank you, Sarah. I have a couple of questions. Who do I direct my questions? Who do I direct my questions to?
Who's apparently online.
Oh, hi, Edward.
Yeah, Edward's on
Edward's
Zoom.
online.
He's joining us. There he is.
So it wasn't clear from the information. Are we losing any trees in the process of this work?
No, not in this particular one. This is actually some rework of some previous failure from flood damage.
Oh, okay. And so habitat wouldn't be at risk either.
Correct. Habitat's not at risk, and this is actually done under an already issued wetland permit for general maintenance in our floodways.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Not going to call it up.
Go ahead.
And my quick question is also about trees. When we did the phase 1 changes, they added maybe 8 or so small cottonwoods that are starting to grow up. I didn't see any tree planting shown on the plans. Is there any? Did you know of?
Don't know that they have tree planting. They've got, I believe there's some willow staking, and they're ultimately working on, or this project is to restabilize that bank slope.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so yes, go ahead, please.
I don't know if this is for.
I don't know if this is for Edward or Charles or someone else, but at a previous meeting, I think it was Kurt who asked, what are the criteria by which we're supposed to be evaluating these floodplain development projects? And I don't know if staff have any thoughts about that for us. You know, when we do a concept review or a site review or an annexation, the criteria in the code are pretty clear. And I think if there's any guidance for us in terms of how we should be reviewing these floodplain development projects, that would be good.
Certainly, and I can speak to that at a high level tonight. I think we're planning at some point next year to come in and do a more detailed presentation. But there is very specific code in terms of the flood and wetland permits, which can be found in Title 9, 9 Chapter 3 floodplain. There are permit criteria in 936. wetland permits in 939. As I said, we will come in and do a more detailed 101 session next year to help better explain the criteria and what you're looking at.
Thank you, Edward.
Anything else? All right, so nobody wants to call that item up either. We're going to move on to our public hearing items. Our first public hearing item, just to start with, we've scheduled 90 minutes for this public hearing item. It's the concept plan review and comment for redevelopment proposal of 1855 South Flatiron Court. The proposal includes demolition of the existing commercial industrial buildings and redevelopment of the site with research and development uses. The new development is proposed to include two approximately 100,000 square foot buildings and a parking garage, and it's reviewed under case number LUR 2023-00045. We'll start with I think 15-minute presentation from staff and then a up to 15-minute presentation from the applicant, and then we'll take public comments.
Good evening, Planning Board and members of the public. The item before you tonight is a concept plan for a new development at 1855 South Flatiron Court. There we go. Okay. In this presentation, I will briefly cover the information that was provided in staff's memo, including the purpose and process of concept plan, the project proposal and background, and some key issues for discussion. There we go. Okay. The purpose of concept plan is to review a general development plan for a specific site and help identify key issues in advance of any site review submittal. The applicant will receive comments from the board, staff, and the public. And as a reminder, no formal action will be taken tonight. The applicant completed the necessary public notice requirements per the code. A written notice was sent to the property owners within 600 feet and a sign posting was placed on site as well. Staff received one comment from a neighbor and that comment has been included in the staff memo.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Allison, I think on Zoom, we're seeing your slideshow and your next slide. Oh, okay. I think we're seeing the notes and the next slide and all of that on Zoom.
Thank you. Let me
And
see.
Allison, did you introduce yourself?
Oh, no, I didn't. Hi, I'm Allison Blaine, Senior Planner. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hold on. Is it still showing the notes? Is it good? Okay, hold on. Hang tight, everyone. Okay, I think that's where I was. Okay. Okay, the subject site is located at the end of South Flatiron Court, just south of Central Ave and north of the railroad. And the proposed application will include the property addressed at 1855 South Flatiron, as well as two outlets that are to the west and covered by flood and drainage easements. And the entire site is indicated here in yellow with the two outlets, kind of that little tail to the left. The majority of the site is designated as mixed-use industrial, which includes light industrial uses as well as retail, office, and commercial uses. Mixed-use industrial zones encourage vibrant, walkable, and working neighborhoods, as well as amenities and services to nearby residents and employees. And then a small portion of the site, just to the east in the southeast corner, is designated as OSO, and those areas are protected by easements. The site is zoned industrial general and is surrounded by other IG zones, as well as the South Boulder Creek, which is zoned public there on the east. Intensity standards for the zone are based on a combination of the following: an FAR limitation of 0.5 to 1, the provision of a minimum of 20% of usable open space for the site due to the proposed height, and the application of height and setback standards. Per table 7.1 of the land use code, industrial buildings are limited to 3 stories and a maximum height of 40 feet by right. The site is located within the Flatiron Industrial Business Park in East Boulder and is surrounded by a hub of industrial and commercial uses, including technical offices, biosciences, manufacturing uses, and local Boulder businesses like Upslope Brewing and Chocolate Love. And just to the east is OSMP property containing the South Boulder Creek and the adjacent multi-use path. Due to its location, the site is also subject to the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan. And just here another view. The railway runs adjacent to the site and separates it from Arapahoe and other commercial and industrial uses along Arapahoe as well as the Arapahoe and 55th Street Station. And the broader context of the surrounding uses includes the Flatirons Golf Course, the Valmont Lake and Hillcrest reservoirs, as well as mixed density residential. The site is currently occupied by the offices for Lumen, which was previously CenturyLink, and the existing site consists of a larger brick structure, covered parking, and some accessory structures. Currently, the site is mostly surface parking with some asphalt, lacks vegetation and mature trees. Due to the proximity to the South Boulder Creek and Dry Creek Ditch number 2, which is further west, the site contains high functioning wetlands along the southern and eastern property line, and the site is also impacted by the 100-year, 500-year high hazard and conveyance flood zones. So the proposal being discussed tonight is for 2 3-story buildings that will function as research and development uses. The 2 main buildings, buildings A and B, are situated closer to the public realm along the northern and western edges, with a detached parking structure proposed for the southeast corner. And then there's some additional surface parking throughout the site, primarily by building A and building B. Primary access, site access is from South Flatiron Court, with access points from the multi-use path just crossing the eastern portion. And then there's a fire and service access road that surrounds the perimeter. It's kind of hard to see in the picture, but there is no proposed development within the outlots or the functioning wetlands. And then last, a 9% parking reduction is being requested as part of this application or proposal. The architecture of the project is contemporary and building materials include steel, concrete, and profiled metal. There is a significant amount of glazing and transparency in the building design. And the spaces between the buildings contain pedestrian walkways and greenery to create a courtyard that encloses on-site amenity spaces and counts towards the site's open space requirements. The proposal is largely 3-story flat roof buildings with some mechanical screening on the roof. And those buildings exceed the by right height for industrial zones. The project appears to meet FAR requirements and proposes about 207,000 square feet, which is less than the maximum of 215,000 square feet. But detailed floor plans will be provided as part of the site review application so that staff can confirm FAR calculations. The proposal includes 2 modifications to the land use code. One is a 9% parking reduction to allow for 468 spaces where 517 are required. This would typically be an administrative review and approval, but can be reviewed as part of the site review application. And the second is a height modification to allow development over the by right height. So building A is proposed to be 45 feet and meets the conditional height criteria for an additional 5 feet of height. And then building B is located within the floodplain and is proposing a height of 50 feet to meet the required flood protection elevation. And the proposal will be subject to additional criteria for building form and massing for buildings that are over that conditional height, as well as site design at time of site review. Staff has identified 3 key issues for discussion, and I'll go through those one by one in the following slides. Key issue 1, is the proposal consistent with policies of the BVCP and the vision for the area as shown in the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan? And staff finds that overall the proposed use and design for the site aligns with key BVCP policies and the MUI designation. Some of the policies I included on the slide, but are also included in the memo. And as stated earlier, the site is also subject to the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, which envisions mixed-use development with residential while also encouraging the preservation of industrial uses. This area is also specifically called out as an area of change to be designed as a walkable hub for workers and nearby residents. And further, the area is designated as a destination workplace place type, which calls for ground floor activation and improved access and mobility to encourage walkability and access for all users. Staff recognizes that residential may not be suitable for this area given the surrounding industrial uses, railroad and power plant. However, staff has identified 2 aspects of the proposal that could better align with the vision for the area and create consistency with the site review criteria. And that first one is the connections. The site acts as a gateway to the Flatirons Industrial Business Park from that multi-use path. And the sub-community plan proposes options for first and last mile connections. The proposal does include a small connection from the path to the site. However, staff recommends a well-planned and extended connection from the path all the way to South Flatiron Court. As proposed, bikes and pedestrian traffic spill out into the road for vehicular egress and can result in some unsafe conditions. And then second, there is a greater opportunity to include some sort of ground floor use like a cafe or a small store that would activate the space and further align with the vision of the destination workplace place type. Key issue 2, does planning board have feedback for the applicant on the conceptual site plan and building design? Staff finds that the general layout of buildings and amenities is appropriate for the site. Specifically, the parking is screened behind the building A and B from the public realm. Staff also finds that the proposed materials are a good starting point and that the buildings are scaled appropriately to the area. And further, the architecture conveys a modern office and lab space. Generally, more information will be necessary to review open space design and operating characteristics, building massing, and circulation at time of site review. Like I'd said in the previous slide, some further consideration should be given to the circulation patterns throughout the site for pedestrians, vehicles, and users of the multi-use path. And then the final key issue is just the opportunity for a planning board to highlight or raise any key issues that they would like to discuss and share with the applicant. For next steps after the hearing tonight, City Council has 30 days to call up the item for council hearing to provide additional feedback. After that, the applicant can either proceed with submitting a site review application or submit a second concept review application. And last, because the site review application would include a height modification, the approval will be made by planning board and subject to call up by City Council. And that's it. Leave it open for questions on the presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Let's start down here. Do you have any questions?
I do. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes here. I just have a couple of questions for staff. One was about the materials. So by the way, thank you. That was an excellent presentation, very thorough, gave us everything we needed, I thought. If I can find my notes, the materials that were the applicant is proposing to use, some of them from the renderings, and I know this is not a site review and this is very preliminary, some of them have that sort of rusty metal look. Is that a type of material that staff considers to be consistent with high quality, durable looking materials?
I think we'd probably look at that more closely at site review with our like urban designer. As far as like the rustiness, I'm not quite sure. I don't know if Charles, you have any thoughts on the durable materials, but I think we'd review that more closely.
I mean, I think that is an intentional like choice of a design. And I'm not trying to impose my personal preferences, but I was just wondering how staff considers, is that in line with our guidelines around durable, high quality materials? So just a question. And my other question was around that connection, the connections to the multi-use path. It said there were 2 connections proposed, a north and a south.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Parks and Open Space was not okay with the southern connection. Can you go into that in a little more detail about why staff would not consider that southern connection to be potentially acceptable?
Yeah, it's my understanding that it would disrupt an existing flood levee. And so trying to limit the access crossing that flood levee. So they'd have one or the other, but the one on the north is more aligned with what is shown in the connections plan in the East Boulder subcommunity plan.
Okay, so they both cross the levee and it's just a matter of trying to limit the number of crossings.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Those were my questions.
Mark?
Great, thank you, Allison. I'm looking at page 15 of my packet, which does not include the second call-up item. So I'm looking at figure 1, which is the aerial view of the subject property with a purple border around it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so we're looking at the same thing. The property boundary as drawn looks like the multi-use path dips in and comes inside the property boundary and then dips out. So is that the case? Does the multi-use path dip in to private property.
As I understand it, yes.
Okay. What is our current easement, access allowance, et cetera, for the current MUP? And anyway, let's answer that one. And then is there anything that is documented that would transfer, that would or has transferred with the property? Has the property transferred? Is it still owned by CenturyLink, or is it under?
No, I think it's the current,
No, they bought-
our applicant team here.
Okay.
Mhm.
They bought the entire park.
Okay, anyway, so, okay. So what easement rights has the city obtained to ensure access for that multi-use path?
Sorry, I'm just taking a look at
Sure.
the map right now. Right now I'm just seeing the flood and drainage easement, but off the top of my head, I can definitely look more into that for you.
So my request would be that when we did the Millennium, we created a condition that clarified and certified or formalized the access for a city-owned multi-use path crossing onto private property. So my suggestion is that by the time this comes back for site review, that public access 24/7 be documented and formalized, so we don't go through a kind of a site review thing. But that's a concern of mine, and especially if we are counting on or planning on a site review approval based on connections, then that access from the multi-use path to the Flatiron Court would also be part of that documentation, would be my suggestion.
Sure.
Okay. I think that's it for staff right now. I'll have applicant questions.
Okay, ML.
Thank you. And thank you, Ellison, for a great presentation. I appreciated here's what it is and here's what we might be needing. I like that part. So I have a couple of questions just to make sure I'm looking at this correctly. Will this be subject to the current site review criteria?
Yes.
Okay. And in your presentation, you talked about the railroad kind of providing the tracks, providing like a barrier. Is there any idea or thought of providing a crossing or something? Because in the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, this is kind of an important part of that.
Yeah,
development.
I don't know it from the 1855 Flatiron property, but there is the, for the multi-use path, there is that, it does cross over or under.
Under.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's pretty close.
Mhm. Yeah, and if with the connection, it would be right along the proposed or the subject site.
Right. So my last clarifying question is on the height modification. What condition did this project meet in order to ask for a height modification?
It would be, I can't remember the number, but for the, to elevate above the flood protection elevation.
So
They can-
that's the one building and the other building?
The other building is,
Is that my right?
yeah, it's but a conditional height and it's just a criteria that we can review.
And do we have a maximum height for mechanical?
We do, I think it's 16, yeah.
And as far as you could tell, are these buildings showing sort of that maximum on that mechanical?
We didn't have the scaled elevations to show the screening, but we can ask the applicant too.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, and thank you for this presentation. My first question is, you said that the staff, in staff's judgment, this may not be an appropriate place for residential, and you said because of the surrounding industrial, railroad, and the power plant, Valmont power plant. My question is, construction is just finishing up on a large project, the weather vane, formerly known as something else, Waterview, thank you. Project, which also is adjoining industrial, also is next to the railroad, also is close to the power plant. So what do you see as the distinguishing feature there?
I think the subject site is located within the Flatirons Industrial Business Park. And so the compatibility with those surrounding uses as well would be taken into account.
Okay. Okay,
Can I colloquy on that?
absolutely.
I would like to colloquy. So I was part of the development of the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, and the applicant may be aware that that entire row of industrial businesses on Central Avenue that's to the north of your property is slated to become mainstream live work as the place type. It has not yet been manifested in zoning, but it is absolutely, this area is absolutely envisioned as mixed use with a potential for residential above. And, you know, it's not required, but it's this one little corner at the bottom of that row of Main Street live work that is still destination office place type in the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan. So it's all going to be rezoned and allow residential. So if that is something that the applicant is interested in, I don't know if that's your business model. It doesn't sound like it is, but I think if something were to change in your estimation of what this site might be good for, I think I, for one, would welcome a concept that had residential here. So I don't think that this site needs to be limited by the current zoning. Even with mixed use industrial, residential is allowed. And the way this is envisioned to develop into the future, there will be higher concentrations of residential all around you at this site. And with Upslope Brewery, and well, I'll save this for my comments. I'm going on too much, but I agree with you, Kurt. I think that residential here could absolutely be appropriate. If I'm reading into your comment
It
correctly.
was just a question.
Anything else, Kurt?
Okay, yes, my second question, briefly, we got a draft TDM plan, and I realized that that wasn't really, that's not something that is ordinarily reviewed as part of concept plan. But the draft TDM plan, as I saw it, identified under parking, the parking management strategy, really it was just, as I understood it, it was just the 9% parking reduction. Is that something that staff would consider to qualify as parking management? I mean, would that be sufficient to just to claim parking management?
We would review the specific criteria in the code for parking reductions. I think it's 996F. And review, I think some of the other criteria is, you know, proximity to like bus lines, or if there's on-street parking. So we would review that as well as the code criteria for parking reductions.
Okay, but you don't have guidance about, so it's in reference to this draft TDM toolkit, which I can see Mark wanting to jump in already.
I'm just gonna, yeah,
Not at the.
yeah, I'm just gonna say, I have comments prepared for the applicant after their presentation about
Okay,
this particular subject.
Can we make those
But-
comments when we actually get to the?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I was just letting Kurt know.
Great.
but my question is, you don't, as far as you know, there isn't guidance about specifically what these terms in this draft TDM toolkit mean and what is necessary in order to actually satisfy them?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer for that one.
Okay.
Do you have about the TDM plans and the parking management?
It's about you sent in response to a question from Mark, their very draft TDM plan, which was written up in reference to our draft TDM toolkit, which has never been adopted. But in the context of the set of TDM measures that they were choosing, one is managed parking, and under managed parking, it just referred to the 9% parking reduction. And so my question is, do we have guidance for what would qualify as managed parking?
Charles Farrell, Planning and Development Services. It's a great question. I don't think that a 9% parking reduction on its own would qualify as managed parking. When we think of managed parking, again, we think of kind of some principles where the property owner is actively, I don't want to use the definition manage to define manage, but where they're actively managing their parking in some way, shape, or form, and or incentivizing alternatives to the individual single occupant vehicle. So on its own, I don't think that we would consider that as managed parking. Again, the TDM is a kit of a number of things. It's not just any one thing. And certainly recognize that there are alternatives other than those that are outlined in the toolkit, which I think Mark will probably get to as part of his comments. So to answer your question, I don't think that we would consider a 9% parking reduction on its own as managed parking.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else? I'll hold my questions or comments until we get to the comment period. All right, well, now is the time. And wait, any last questions? No? Okay, now is the opportunity for the applicant to speak. Whoever the applicant is, please come forward. And you'll please introduce yourselves and who you're associated with, and you'll have 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Good evening, Planning Board. So I'm Kelsey. I'm from Biomed Realty, the applicant.
Can you give your whole name, please?
Kelsey Hunter. I'm also joined by Salil, also with Biomed Realty. And then with me sitting here is Ryan from our partners at Perkins.
Whole names, please. We won't know who Ryan is a year from now. So whole names, please.
Oh, sorry, Ryan Bassard.
and
the Salil Piapilli. Thank you. So just wanted to thank you for your time and the engagement tonight. We certainly appreciate the 15 minutes to allow ourselves to introduce ourselves, and then as well as get into our concept review plan for 1855. Also appreciative to Allison and staff for their constant engagement in this process and the review of our concept plan.
Yeah,
We
hold
have
on.
the slide
Yeah,
deck.
I'm trying to, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
So you folks in the room may know this, but we've only just started meeting in person again after COVID. And so sometimes we have technical glitches. So thank you for bearing with us.
No problem. Perfect. If you want to move to page 2, we'll start there. So just a quick overview of the agenda today. We've set up this evening to be efficient and a compact presentation that touches on the 3 main topics as shown. So first we'll start with a little bit of an introduction. This is Biomed's first time standing in front of Planning Board as part of this concept review process. So just want you to learn a little bit more about who we are. Secondly, we'll move into context for 1855. We'd like to go over Boulder plans and policies and the site location within Flatiron Park, building on what Allison mentioned earlier, that ultimately provided the framework for our design on this project. And then lastly, we'll get further in depth on the concept plan, and we'll provide additional commentary on our intent for the future of this site. Next slide, please. So a little bit on Biomed. Biomed Realty develops, owns, and operates Class A life science and technology real estate. We're working hard to meet the growing demand of this industry and provide real estate solutions that allow our tenants to perform innovative research. We're excited about the depths and strength of the talent here in Boulder, and we're looking forward to supporting the continued growing ecosystem here. Next slide, please. Biomed Realty exists to support the advancing frontiers of human health. Our tenants are doing remarkable work every single day to advance the next generations of therapies, drugs, technologies, and vaccines. This includes treatments for infectious diseases, antiviral drugs for COVID-19, and oncology, to name a few. Next slide, please. This slide showcases a selection of Biomed's amazing campuses to give you a flavor of our world. A few points to preview here as it relates to what we do and our vision here in Boulder and for 1855. One, we're successful in providing lab and research facilities in our markets with beautiful real estate. Each project varies in terms of scale, size, look, and feel, but ultimately are crafted to respond to local context, local site conditions, local needs of our customers. Secondly, we pride ourselves on high sustainability standards and our goals to be energy efficient and green. LEED is a focus for us that we commit to very early in the design stages of these projects, and we meet or oftentimes exceed code requirements. You'll hear more on these themes later in the presentation that Ryan will give as it relates to 1855 more specifically. Next slide, please. So moving into speaking on Flatiron Park more directly, we have an aerial shot here. Flatiron Park is a special holding for us, given the scale and the close proximity of the 23 buildings that we own in this overall campus. We're bringing forward a range of product types, including labs, amenities, and campus activations, with our goal of stitching together a cohesive campus that serves our tenants and the community as a whole. Over the past 1.5 years, following our purchase of Flatiron Park, Biomed Realty has had the opportunity to listen to Boulder's policymakers and understand the city's aspirations. We were an active participant last year in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan and the industrial zoning changes, and really appreciated the opportunity there to provide thoughtful feedback and understand the city's goals more. Moving forward, Biomed has a strong focus on Flatiron Park, and we're committed to the long-term investment on the local ecosystem and the community. We look forward to continuing to work with the city of Boulder here. We're now eager to share our vision for 1855 South Flatiron Court and hear your feedback to allow our vision to meet your vision as well. With that context, we'll move more into the heart of this presentation on 1855, and I'll bring up Ryan to start those slides. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thanks, Kelsey. So what we want to do is start to talk about the context for the project in the beginning of our design. As mentioned earlier, we really looked at the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan to make sure we're aligned with that and really use that as the starting point for the design of the project, all the way from the way we start to think about open space preservation through the energy efficiency, sustainable goals, and the actual building and site planning. Slide. We also looked at how you are thinking, as mentioned earlier, about the evolution of this district and this neighborhood, and making sure that we were thinking about the types of amenities and planning within this to really transform this site. Next slide. That included, as we heard, the destination workplace, which has a lot to do with the ground plane activity as well as connectivity to the larger neighborhood and to transit. Next slide. So in that kind of vein, what we do is we always start by looking at the overall neighborhood and what is there. So here you can see the 5 and 10 minute kind of walking radiuses. And we were really pleased with the amount of amenities where people could have lunch, gather, recreate that are really close by, approximate to our site. Next slide. As well as the connection to transit. So the ability, as you can see on 55th Street, as well as Arapahoe, a wide variety of bus stops, as well as connections to the multi-use path, which is directly, as you can see here on our site, directly on the east side of our site, which, as we know, connects to a larger range of trails and paths that connect across the city. Also, as we should have mentioned earlier, not only is there the local amenities, which are very close to us, but just within 2 buildings of us is a new kind of hub for the district neighborhood, which is being proposed by Biomed for recreation, kind of entertainment, as well as dining options. Next slide. So in looking more closely at the concept plan for this, you can see, next slide.
Sorry.
Our plan for this. For that plan, it's composed, as mentioned earlier, of 2 structures, Building A and Building B. Building A anchoring the west side of the site and Building B on the northeast corner. We were very intentional about the placement of these buildings to create kind of a new kind of urban place. This kind of neighborhood park or entryway to the site you can see here, where we feature a mixture of kind of drop-off plantings, outdoor rooms, and different amenities that really are at the end and entry to the site, but the ending of South Flatiron Court, facing the neighborhood and the community. You can also see the kind of ramble or the strip that's between the garage, which is located on the southeast. So we've really condensed all the parking to place it either under the buildings or within the structured parking. And that opens up all these kind of green areas we've delineated here with our kind of initial concept site design. And lastly, you can see the kind of idea of this kind of perimeter drive that links the buildings, which is at the back of the site, removing that from the public way. So really pushing the buildings of public space forward. Also, you can see here, there was discussion about the connectivity to the multi-use path. This is showing previously the two connection points. One is right off the Ramble, which is heading directly west off of that. We were in agreement and alignment, and we'll be up for the next round of drawings, submitting just the option for the connection to the north side, which, as you noticed, only crosses the levee one time, as well as providing a protected pathway, not only to our site, but to South Flatiron Court. Next slide. This aerial shows now the buildings in context, so showing that the scale and size of the buildings is consistent with the neighborhood. You can also see the way we start to think about open space, trying to pull the kind of local landscape ecology through the site and through the buildings to really think about this as kind of this kind of green terminus to South Flatiron Court. So we also want to think about the concepts that really drive the architecture and site planning for this. 3 ideas that we pulled from the kind of planning that you've done already, as well as working with our client, is one about collaboration and innovation, embedding that in the architecture and the site design, wellness, and a connection to nature. Next slide. So there was many different ways those can start to evolve, but conceptually, the way we've thought about this is thinking about the actual programs that will inhabit this, particularly at the ground plane of this. So thinking on the kind of upper left-hand corner of really pushing collaboration and meeting spaces outdoors, having those be covered sometimes, have a variety of different choices for people. On the bottom right, having those outdoor spaces have flexibility. So having the program for recreation meetings, but also for exercise and different types of uses, maybe uses we don't even foresee in today's kind of working climate. We think about the ground plane as being really actually pushing co-working spaces, rethinking how lobbies are used, bike lounges, and other active uses at the ground plane. And that we're going to connect all those through not just the multi-use paths that exist on the edge of the site, but push the kind of pathways, those kind of tendrils through the landscape and to connect those spaces. And lastly, we want to think about the science and innovation. These buildings can work well. They need to work well in terms of their infrastructure and the way they're planned. Next slide. Sustainability is important to us and to our client. Our client started at 500 Kendall Street back in 2006 with a LEED Platinum project. We ourselves started to work with them in 2011 for a LEED Platinum corner shell design for Illumina in San Diego. So we have a history of working together to deliver high performance buildings. Some of the things you can see here are ideas that we're starting to embed into the planning here. The kind of 2 concentric rings outline kind of a building, kind of base building blocks in the inner ring, and then where we started really thinking about those active features being amenitized throughout the campus. What we'd like to do, and there'll be a lot of evolution of this as we continue to pursue sustainable aspects of the project, is look at the strategies holistically, that they work together, work with the design. We don't like to look at the scorecard and do just point by point. We like to think of total systems when we design the project. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, for building sections, you can see that we are consistent with the stories in terms of the uses. You can see the 2 stories of research and then a story of parking below at the ground level. That's also be shared with different kind of amenities and uses on the ground plane. We are seeking the 40 feet with the 5 feet of conditional height. And that for the building B, which is in the floodplain below, you can see that we're additionally looking at 5 feet of height in that location. Part of that is also when you look at it, and it's very hard to see here, there's a dashed line at the very bottom. Our lowest grade point, which is where you measure height, is anywhere from almost 2 feet 3 inches for building A and over 6 feet from building B. So the height is already shifted down. So that's part of the reason why we're looking at that. And I think there was also a question about the mechanical screen. So we would be consistent with the height. So looking at the 16 foot as the maximum limit of the mechanical screen. Next slide. The architectural character for this, we are looking at it, once again, reflecting the programmatic goals of the project. So on the upper elevations, those are kind of conceptual elevations of the 2 buildings. We're looking at expressing the kind of research functions of that over the kind of podium piece. But as you can see, we're draping the kind of form of the building down where we have the more public uses, those kind of active ground plane areas at the lower level, at the entry points, lobbies, fitness centers. We're also looking at a mixture of different materials, kind of conceptually early on, use of ceramic frit, kind of warm tones, looking at kind of the local context of buildings, as well as the kind of beautiful landscape these buildings will inhabit. The use of kind of metal panels or the Corten panels. Typically, and to answer one of the questions, we look at those. The Corten is a kind of a veneer that rusts, that preserves the core, so it stops the aging of the metal, but we usually use those only for landscape trim and elements. We use painted aluminum panels, high performance panels on the building proper, as well as the use of crafted materials like the architectural concrete may be board formed to really show the character and craft and care with which the building is constructed. Slide. And then we just have a series of overall conceptual views of the project to give you an idea of the kind of flavor of where we're developing the project to date. This is at that kind of entry courtyard, so we're hovering above South Flatiron Court at this point, looking back at the project. You can see how we're really thinking of a mix of different uses, different types of spaces within this, from the kind of rain gardens, bioswale to the kind of amphitheater spaces, really creating places for people to be outside in this environment, as well as great visibility and connectivity, both to the amenities on site, as well as the Flatirons and the neighborhood beyond. Next slide. We've started to think about the building, really kind of draping the building or lifting the kind of skin of the building to expose those kind of ground floor pieces. Here seeing the entry to building B, as well as really at this point shielding and hiding the parking structures with plantings, as well as architectural screening. Next slide. One of the advantages, as mentioned earlier, is by putting all the parking recessed under the building or the structure, we really are able to open the site. So here, the parking structure is to the left. We have the architectural building, the facade for building B here, as you can see. We've thought about articulation of these buildings at a variety of scales, the draping of the kind of skin at those locations, looking at the kind of micro serrations and micro modulations to create a lot of scale and texture, once again, at a very conceptual level. Slide. And lastly, wanted to kind of bring it back to those three ideas that we really are thinking about these buildings, whether you're working at a lab bench, sitting in a meeting, inside or outside, that's about connectivity to nature. It's about the health and wellness of the community and the people who work here. So allowing them to engage and enjoy kind of areas kind of within the sun or under the cover of the buildings in the kind of autumn and spring, or even as you start to traverse the stairs, which are expressed in within the building, to actively engage within this. That's our last slide.
Great, thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask the first question, if y'all don't mind. It's a little unclear to me how cars get to the parking garage.
Sure.
And I kind of have the sense they go through what's meant to be all this pedestrian space. So could you just walk us through that?
Yeah, we've intentionally actually separated it out. If you go to the site plan, this is a real challenge because I like to point at things and I can't point.
It's just a little delayed.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, that's okay. So the way cars, there's a point of ingress and egress off of South Flatiron Court. The cars will come in and we've have them circulating around the perimeter of the site. So to get to the garage, no one drives through the courtyard with the exception of the drop off. So the drop off allows them to come in and come back to that drive. And then all the kind of tendrils of space and those connections are completely outside of the circulation zone for cars. We're separating those.
All right, thanks very much. All right, I'll start down here with Kurt. And these should be questions and then we can have conversation amongst ourselves when it comes to our time to give comments.
So just following up on Sarah's question. So for example, if you're parking underneath building B, you come in where it says ingress there and go all the way around. And then there's a big
There's an
garage
building.
door on the east side.
Correct.
Okay. And then another about vehicular circulation, you show sort of in the middle,
Yes.
you show sort of a traffic circle
Correct.
with, and you showed cars on it. What is that then? Because I think that's maybe partly what Sarah was referring to. I thought that was supposed to be the pedestrian space, but then there are cars in there.
We're mixing both and we've done that on a number of campuses. But what we're doing is, you mind if I go up and point at the board? Is that okay?
I'm fine with it. But people,
Just a comment without being on the microphone. So you're talking about this space right here.
yes,
So what'll happen with, as you come in, is you'll come in off of here. This is two ways, so you can come in and circulate in and then back out. You'll see there's a light line here, that's restricting where the cars can actually go. So all of the area, these aprons, these spaces, this kind of zone, the cars can't go, there'll be bollards or other kind of detections at that point. So
that's sort of a drop off.
yes, so the idea
Space,
is
okay.
there's no parking at that location. That gives us access to the front door. Uber, anyone posed with accessibility issues can park here and, or not park, be dropped off and then circulate around out of the site.
And then one more about the motor vehicle access, because I think this is, I don't know, it seems kind of problematic. The elevation, the east elevation that I saw of building B seemed to show a really big wide like garage entrance. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's two, we're putting all the loading.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that for recording purposes and for posterity, if we ever go back and watch the video, we need you to talk into the microphone.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the, on the east side of both buildings, we're providing loading, but it's all recessed in under the building. So the garage door you might have seen in an elevation is for a loading surface. We're separating those out from the separate vehicular entry because we once again want to keep it clear and separate where those are. So on the southeast corner of building B, there is a garage door at that location, which is for the loading dock. On the northeast corner, almost where it says access, that's where the vehicles would actually enter the building for that first floor parking.
Thank you. I think that's my only questions.
All right, ML, do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
Just stop me when I've asked too many and I'll come back to me.
Just remember, it's just questions.
Right, correct. Thank you for your presentation. I have a number of clarifying questions. I will start with a couple that are programmatic. How many people are you expecting to work here? What are you designing, population of employees or?
Yeah, so we're expecting about 400 between the two buildings. Currently, there's a 40,000 square foot building on the site that was previously CenturyLink. And that was about 40,000 square feet. So the increment add is 170,000 square feet with 400 employees.
Okay. Looking at this plan, what percent of the non-building area is paved? I see a lot of concrete and I see a lot of asphalt. Do you know what percent of the site is paved?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but we can get that to you.
Okay. Are you proposing for, you said there was surface parking. Are you proposing it to be pervious? Are you proposing any of the paved areas to be pervious?
Surely, yes. When we start to look at that, particularly with the pathways, even in some of the parking areas, we would be looking at that to create the pervious area. Because as you know, what's right out there right now is primarily completely paved concrete or kind of gravel laydown. But yes, that is the concept. And to clarify one thing, the only right now surface parking we have on the proposal is you can see a strip on building A,
right,
kind of to the north, and a small strip on building.
Right, I see those. You've been talking about things that are under the building. So we've got 100-year, 500-year, high hazard, conveyance, flood zones, et cetera, et cetera. How is the use of a below grade space compatible with being respectful to the fact that we've got high groundwater and water issues?
Yeah, sure. So on the building B, which is in the floodplain, we've actually elevated that first floor slab. And we have that above the floodplain at this point. We also know by the code and for the other uses there, we're not putting any uses down there that would be not allowed by code that would be within the flood area. So certain types of mechanical rooms, certain types of electrical rooms aren't allowed to be that. And so the only areas that we have down there are allowed by the code.
So I'm asking these questions in the spirit of kind of like this total system holistic approach to everything. And there's water on the site and you're putting a lot of dense pervious things on it. So that is something that I'm wondering about. This isn't a question. It's just, that's the framework that I'm trying to, I'll ask some building questions. In the elevations, your 16-foot tall mechanical area, that's pretty significant height. I mean, it's, if you look at the elevations, it's like you've got a 4-story building. Is that, do your clients need that kind of mechanical height?
Yeah, so typically for these for research buildings, the mechanical systems, including exhaust flumes and other things, are quite tall. So we find that usually that's a fairly standard mechanical height for this type of building. The other thing is, I do know by the code and regulations, we're not allowed to project above that. So that sometimes in other jurisdictions, you may see mechanical screens shorter, but a lot of equipment projecting above it, whether it's flues or other components. So the idea with that absolute limit, if we're able to keep all the equipment, including any flues, vents, other things below that, so it's not visible.
That might be all of my questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, ML. Mark?
Mechanical screening is a really interesting and challenging topic. So I'm going to follow on with ML. So did you consider something, a building design? We've recently done a site review and approved a building where the mechanical screening was essentially incorporated into the roof form. And the University of Colorado has more than one building doing that sort of thing. Did you consider that? And if you didn't, why did you not go with that sort of more integrated approach?
Sure. The interesting thing about doing that, and we saw the other proposal, kind of gabled forms or roof forms, is for either scenario, what we're trying to do is either conceal it or diminish it, right, visually. So the approach we took, that's one option, is integrate it into the form. The second option is to actually push it back from the edges as far as possible. So having that, the majority of the building edges, so we have that be the lower roof area. So from a pedestrian experience and neighborhood perspective, those viewpoints, it's harder to see the screen. I do know we've done schemes where we've actually made the building scheme or the skin or the form conceal it. In some instances, it can actually make the form and appear taller or bigger, have more mass, depending on that piece. The other piece that we were really trying to do here is we're trying to preserve a lot of roof area for photovoltaics, for energy production. So the ability to do a minimal screen, preserve flat areas. You can see here in our kind of diagram, the grayish kind of blue bars are photovoltaics. We have great orientation, great exposure. We don't have anything tall south of us, any natural features. So we can really preserve a lot of this area. We're getting really good solar gain on those photovoltaics. So.
Okay, nice response on that. Thank you. I would then ask, I know this is concept review, and so materials and designs and so forth are not formalized or finalized. But have you given your screening material and design close to the same level of design effort and creativity that you give to the rest of the surfaces of the building? Because in my view, many times screening it's perfunctory, it's ugly, and yet it is 1/3 of the building designer mass. So anyway, is what you're showing us representative of screening materials, or do you think you'll have different other things?
We'll keep evolving it. We've looked at a lot of variations with this, whether it was shaped in some way, the materiality itself, to whether it's perforated at certain areas to help reduce it visually so you can see through portions of it. Once again, we want to we're at a very early stage. You can see we have the cleanest mechanical plan ever on this building, so no units. So we want to be careful about that, but the shaping of it, the height and aspect of it, as well as use of materiality, perforations or things help it want to go away and be kind of quiet in that regard and look careful, cared for.
Okay, we'll have more on in the comment section. So I'll continue with another question in regard to the multi-use path. So I got a little confused. Is there one or two connections to the multi-use path?
We showed two with the application. The staff comment was to do one, which is the northern piece, and we are in agreement to that. So the northern one is actually kind of, right now, if you go out to the site, there's kind of a dirt path that connects to it. So obviously people have been using that to access that, particularly off of probably South Flatiron Court. So the idea is to actually formalize it, make that our primary connection. The piece that we're not showing this is rather than going into our neighbor's parking lot, which is what's happening now, we're going to divert it along the property line within a landscape buffer, which allows it to be protected from cars.
Okay, thank you. The between building B and the parking garage, this may just be, someone getting creative with their rendering. There's a very curvy sidewalk slash thing. Is that something that's actually being proposed, or with that sort of snaky sort of look?
That'll be evolving, particularly as we were talking about bikes trying to move through that.
Yeah.
So one advantage is moving the bikes to the north allows them to have a much clearer access to the building without having to go through pedestrian spaces and navigate a very exciting series of hairpin turns. The other thing is it'll change a little bit now that we won't have that east piece outletting on the multi-use path. So we'll want to terminate that in a space.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions. Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you. Just a couple around this idea of residential, and I know there's no residential proposed in here. Did you think about that at all? Did you consider residential at all for this property?
We have not considered residential. We were part of that, East Boulder sub-community plan, and it is exciting and offers some good opportunities. So it's definitely something we can go back and think about. This was the primary use that we were working towards over the last few months.
Thank you. And does Biomed have experience developing mixed use, including residential? I see one of your colleagues wants to step up, potentially.
Your name, please.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I'm Salil Payapalli with Biomed Realty. Great questions on what we do. We've over the past, me personally, but also as a company over 20+ years, we've developed specialty in one particular area, which is to support the research ecosystem. Ultimately, I know that's not quite the answer you want to hear, but I'm just being honest about what we've gotten really good at. We've also got our ecosystem of customers and clients we've been supporting over the years, and it's all around the area of research and technology. So the short answer is, we haven't developed, sort of housing in any of our across the portfolio at 16 million square feet plus, across all these markets. That's the reality of what we do.
No, I appreciate the honesty. It's good to know what you specialize in and what you have experience in. And did I hear in the presentation you own 23 properties in the Flatiron Business Park?
Yes, correct. So we own 23 buildings right now. We own this land, this 1855 and the existing building, and this development will be our 24th development.
Thank you so much.
Just as a reminder, they bought the entire park.
Well, actually, I would disagree with that. Cedar Summit, you guys don't own the Cedar Summit building, do you?
No, we don't. So we own 23 buildings. This will be our 24th. We own just over half of the park, so not the full thing.
So,
thank you.
You're welcome. More questions? Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
One more question. Maybe this is because I take the South Boulder Creek path so often, but I sort of feel like the east facade is really the front of this. And so I'm wondering about the design of the parking garage and how that will read from the path in the east side. Have you given any thought to how that will be treated, particularly from that elevation?
Right now, at a very conceptual level, yes. The idea for these buildings, in the elevation we developed is there's no back to the buildings because we know you're either going to be seen from the adjacent neighborhood or the multi-use path or from the north. So we've thought a lot about the east side of building B having the same materials, the same expression continue around that, the same use of the concrete at the base, the crafted concrete and the curtain wall units up above. I think one thing that we'll look at very carefully is the apertures for the garage, as well as, we had at one point had moved the vehicular access to the northern side so you didn't have a series of different portals on that edge. So once again, we're at an early stage, but the intent is that it's treated with the same care, realizing it is a front door for this building and for the community.
So I appreciate that, but I think you were talking about building B, is that right?
Correct.
And I was asking about the parking garage.
Oh, the garage itself.
The
Oh,
actual
there you go.
structure.
So I was thinking entry to the
That's
garage.
okay. No. I'm also interested in that. but-
Yeah, so the garage is going to be interesting. So we are looking at the screening material that exists on the north side adjacent to ours, extending on the west and the east, particularly on the east because of that issue. One thing also that we're starting to look at is also if we can have landscape screening, some beautiful trees extend onto that eastern side. We really want to keep the height of the garage low. We want to screen it architecturally, but most importantly, screen it with native vegetation as much as possible.
And will parking be allowed on the top level?
It will, but we're not placing any kind of canopy or roof structure on that. So we're trying to keep that very low for that piece.
But the cars, if there are cars parked up there, then they will be visible.
They'll project above the guardrail, but we're not extending any kind of canopy or cover above that to keep it low.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now it's time for public comment. Is there anyone here who has public comment about this project? Seeing no one. Amanda, is there anyone online?
Yes, Vivian will help us with one person so far online.
Yeah, so far, Lynn Siegel has her hand raised. So we'll start with Lynn. Lynn, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
You were too fast for me. I was just going to take notes. Number one, ground loop heat pumps. I didn't hear that for the heating and cooling of this space. And I say nothing should be built in Boulder further without ground loop heat pumps. I mean, you might have a lot of solar, but I don't know if you're using that solar for electric forms of heat, like air-to-air heat pumps, or I don't know how larger buildings are designed, but I didn't hear anything. If someone wants to mention that they did, then great, but that's my number one criteria for any large buildings is ground loop heat pumps. I don't think there should be any height limitations. If you're in the, like variations given, subsidies given for height. You're on a floodplain, you bought the land that way, that's what you get. I also don't see that the building appearance seems rather looming to me also. The height seems to be just more than it needs to be, in spite of the fact that it's life sciences and you need various processes going on in there that use up space. I mean, I'm in the field of life sciences, so I appreciate this, but I think the first thing that needs to be considered with any planning or building for things like this, and maybe it should go into how we're designing our zoning to include housing, it should incorporate the jobs housing imbalance and improving the balance, creating towards a balance of jobs housing. That should be number one criteria. If Boulder Valley Comp Plan doesn't have that incorporated, then we need to have a revamp of the Boulder Valley Comp Plan and include that, because that's what's driving up the cost of everything. It's what's driving up the homelessness, the property values, the costs for everyone, the angst in the whole community, along with inflation and everything else. So if jobs housing can be balanced, I think we would grow much more reasonably, and we wouldn't have so many inflationary systems going on in our building format. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for your contribution tonight. There are no other hands raised from the online participants.
Okay, thanks very much, Vivian. All right, we'll now go to our comments, and we'll organize it by the three primary questions that were asked. So the first question is the proposal consistent with Boulder Valley Comp Plan, Boulder Valley Comp Plan policies and vision for the area as shown in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. And we'll start with the expert on the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, Laura.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I don't know that I'm an expert, but I was involved with the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan as a member of that community working group before I was on planning board. My comments about compatibility are, yes, I think that it is generally compatible. And I would encourage the applicant to think about whether residential can be incorporated. And of course, we cannot require that. You are perfectly within your rights not to do that. But I do want to pull up, if either Amanda or Vivian could pull up the place types map from the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan.
Can you see it?
That's the land use plan. And then the place types should be on page 20 of that document, I believe.
She's not an expert.
I just looked this up. It's got the, I think it's going the other direction.
So that's page 20. Let's see, I'll continue here. Is
Maybe
it
it's a
also a
different
map?
page. It is a map, and there we go. That's it. So with the cartoon buildings at the bottom. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm assuming the applicant is familiar with this. I'm seeing nods, so thank you. But I don't know if all my colleagues are familiar with this. So if we could zoom in a little bit on that map and the part that is the Flatirons Business Park, you can see in the sort of the deep blue, that is Destination Workplace. And in the purple, that is a place type called Main Street Live Work. And place types were kind of an innovation for this plan. We haven't used them in the city before. They've never been implemented into zoning. And I think staff are working on implementing these place types into zoning right now. But all of these place types, the vision for this office park is that it would develop into something more residential than an office park, that it would not stay just industrial or just office buildings, but that it would become a neighborhood with residential, with personal services, with restaurants and cafes, and be more of a kind of place where people not just work, but also live. And, the property that you're looking at right now is in that lower southeast corner, and it is Destination Workplace. So it's definitely appropriate to have workplaces here. And I think staff had some comments about integrating a little bit more mixed use, like some cafes or some retail on the bottom floor. I think that's totally appropriate. But the reason why that Main Street Live Work piece was put where it is because it backs up to the creek path, right, to the amenity there. And so I think the southeast corner could also be appropriate for that if that's what you wanted, or if you have other buildings that are nearby. But you've got, as you pointed out, some beautiful amenities here. You've got 2 breweries within walking distance, Wild Provisions and Upslope. You've got Ozo. You've got a deli right there. You've got a chocolate factory. Like, this is a place that a certain type of Boulder resident would love to live. And so, again, we can't require you to do residential here. But if at some point your concept changes, I think for one, I don't know if my fellow board members would like to comment on this, but that is the vision for this area, is that it would be more mixed use, including residential. So I think that'd be very welcome. So those are my comments on compatibility.
I find that the concept plan is, for the most part, consistent with BBC policies and consistent with the vision for the area as shown in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. I don't have a lot of input on our first key issue.
I'll call on myself, and I would agree with Laura. I had a much stronger language regarding residential than Laura, who was quite kind. But I would like to point out both to the applicant and to the city, this is one of the challenges of creating multiple options rather than really encouraging housing in an area where we really need housing. I want to, so I won't read what I wrote, but I will support what Laura said about the encouraging you all to perhaps step away from your business model and perhaps work with some residential developers. I appreciate staff's pointing out the need for street level activation, which is also key to the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. Again, I won't read what I've written here. And I appreciate Allison's long list of Boulder Valley Comp Plan policies that are relevant to this proposal and want to highlight the ones that I'm most concerned about, presuming this comes back while I'm still on board. The first is building height. The second is enhanced design. The third is wetland and riparian protection. And the third is energy efficiency building design. ML.
Thank you. And Laura, thank you for getting right into the core of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. I think that is, we make these subcommunity plans as a vision for how we want the future to form itself and what we want it to be informed by. So when asking about, so you're providing 400 jobs and, you know, there's no housing. Boulder doesn't have housing for all of the people that want to live and work here, or want to work here to live here. So I think that there is, I appreciate the language that you're using, that you're looking at total systems, you're looking at maybe big picture, but I think that part of that should include the plan that is proposed for this area. And at the very, I love what Allison put out there, that create a public opportunity with some retail, coffee shop, et cetera, on the ground floor. Your employees, I'm sure, will appreciate having that ability. But the idea that it's part of that it is intended to be part of a community that is going to be pretty interactive. So I think that can't be driven home enough. And that is are you consistent with the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan? I'm not convinced that what is being proposed is headed in that direction. And I would encourage you to look deeply at the plan and see what it proposes for what's going to happen to the north, what's going to happen to the south, and what that destination workplace type is intended to be, because that's what we're looking at for that area. So those are my comments, and I really appreciate the thoroughness that Laura went through to kind of pull up the map and talk about things in a very specific way.
Thank you, Will. I'll follow on along that same theme that Laura and Sarah and ML were going. I think that it is very important that housing be considered here. And I think that as it stands, this is not consistent with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan or with the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. The MUI, Mixed Use Industrial Land Use, says MUI areas should integrate diverse housing, commercial and retail options into industrial areas to create vibrant, walkable, working neighborhoods. In the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, we have a large number of policies. I won't list them all. For Lynn Siegel's benefit, policy 111 is jobs, housing, balance, which talks about converting commercial and industrial uses to residential uses in appropriate locations. There's 216, mixed use and higher density development, 221, light industrial areas. This talks about guiding appropriate places for housing infill within areas zoned IG, which is what we have here, including along open space and or greenway or trail connections. So it's like exactly describing this particular location. So, and then there's 7-Eleven balancing housing supply with employment base, and so on. So I feel like there's a lot of reason here to believe that taken all together, all these sets of policies are really arguing for not an entirely residential project, but a project with a significant residential component. One thing that I'll add to that is I think, you've got a lot of parking here. And if there were a significant amount of housing along with the some office or industrial uses, you could have a significant amount of parking sharing because the demand peaks, don't overlap, as well as potentially a small amount of internal capture, trip capture, or at least internal trip capture within Flatiron Park. And so I think you could end up with a significantly lower parking count than you currently have, which would save you lots of money, maybe. The last thing, I really appreciate your emphasis on sustainability, green building, LEED. I think that that's all great. But if this building results in 400 more people driving into Boulder every day, then that's not green. The building is green, but as a holistic thing, is in terms of its systemic effects, it's not green. So I have concerns about that. Last thing, I'll just follow up on the street activation. I think that is really important, and I was really concerned. One of the views along the interior, I think it was along that very curvy sidewalk, it showed at the lower level, which was really the parking level, it seemed like it was completely blank there. Like it was just a solid wall with no penetrations, really no interest until you got to the second level. And that is the kind of thing that I would not like to see going forward. I think that, as Laura was pointing out, the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan place types really emphasize the ground floor level for good reason, as you guys can certainly appreciate. And so I would hope that you would pay particular attention to those.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, question number 2. Does planning board have feedback on the conceptual site plans and architecture? And let's start with ML, who is our architect.
I will happily step forward. Thank you very much. So I will start with some comments about the site plan. I think that there, as I pointed out or asked the question, there is a lot of paved area, whether it's asphalt or pedestrian paving, and that has a heat island impact. So I would encourage looking at knowing the numbers first off, how much paved area is there, and how can you work to mitigate the consequences of that. We talked about the surface parking, and hopefully it will be pervious. And I still am not sure how these buildings with massive footprints and use of below grade are reducing the impacts of the 100, 500 year flood, high hazard and conveyance flood zones. That is not apparent in the site plan on how water is being managed on the site. Building wise, there is a major criteria in the new site review criteria update to that, and that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so I would ask you to take a close look at your architectural materials. Concrete, steel, metal, those all have high carbon footprints. And I think that there are alternatives. There are beautiful alternatives that actually are addressing carbon face on. These materials are not. There's a significant amount of glazing on the building, and I would wonder how that is intended to be managed relative to the energy modeling, the HVAC loads, heat gain, solar glare, reflective glass, and how it might exacerbate the reflectivity on the site. The way that the building is fenestrated at this point, it is not looking like a human scale building. You've got these big panels that go up, 2 and 3 stories. So I think that the human scale that is in our criteria needs to be considered pretty specifically. I understand that this is a concept and maybe I'm not sure. I shouldn't put thoughts out there, but right now the scale of the building is not human scale. And I think if in looking at or in hearing what you're talking about, that you want, people to spill out into the land, you want to create opportunities for people to do indoor, outdoor, whether they're meetings or whether they're classes or however, I think consideration for what the scale of the actual buildings themselves needs to be to accommodate. This is a pedestrian area that you're trying to create. How does that work? And again, just referring back to, it's going to be part of a bigger community, and there's going to be, hopefully people that are interacting at that grade, and be concerned about the human scale. I think that is an important, and again with that, so you've proposed the maximum, almost the maximum size building that you can get on the site. The numbers are like right pretty close to the maximum you can get. You've proposed the maximum heights you can get. So I would take the next step in looking at bring these environmental factors, bring these societal factors into play, and begin eroding some of these sort of maximum use of the site, and think about how does the site, how are what you are proposing, is it resilient? Is it in fact going to give back to the community? Is it going to do some of the things that have to do with the bigger values in the Boulder Valley, comp plan? I think that those are all of my thoughts about the site plan and the architecture. If in fact you're looking at this as a total system, I would suggest that the program you want to look at is the Living Building Challenge. That is going to get you, to the language that you're using. That program will help sort of frame some of the holistic understandings on how you're going to relate to the site. Yeah, that's everything I have to say about input. So I look forward to what you come back with, and I really hope that the evolution happens over the course between now and the other thing I would suggest, and it's not, you don't have to, but we have a design advisory board, and they are pretty tuned into what our criteria are and that sort of thing. You might want to get some input from them, especially in the human scale and the material development of the building.
Thanks, ML. Mark?
I'm going to ask, I have a lot of comments on TDM. Would you say that is better dealt with in key question number 2 or number 3?
Oh, probably number 2. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, and before I begin my TDM commentary, I just want to say that not to be seen as a developer patsy when I said that, hey, okay, I feel like this fulfills the requirements of the BVCP and the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. But I also acknowledge that after adoption of the BVCP and the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, not every project has to fulfill all of the goals of the BVCP and the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, and that on a project by project basis, our goals may be fulfilled, but not on each individual project. I was spent some time in the park visiting the site on Sunday night, and I was stunned at the activity level in the park on Sunday night between the 2 brew pubs were really quite busy. The one, especially the one right next to the site, but I went to the Four Noses as well. And so I was on a brew pub tour, I guess. But anyway.
So you weren't really doing a site visit.
You know, site
Let's
visits
just
always
be-
go better
Mark,
with
let's just
beer.
be honest.
Yes, site visits always go better with beer, but yeah. Anyway, I just, speaking for myself and with all respect to my fellow board members, that not every project can completely fulfill our goals, which is not to say that we should not hold every project to our aspirational goals and standards. So having said that, I want to talk about your transportation demand management. And I got hints of something that I could be more positive about in the applicant's presentation this evening. What I struggled with is what was submitted late in writing, and it was not your, I'm not blaming you for submitting it late. It didn't get put into your packet, but what was submitted later today was your LSC engineering trip calculation and your LSC engineering travel demand management document. And those, that TDM plan that was submitted in writing is underwhelming. It's uncreative. It is disappointing in its parking reduction request. It points to you fulfilling only the minimum of the bike parking. It makes, again, you made mention briefly in your presentation, but your actual documented TDM plans make no mention of charging facilities for bikes or cars, no secure bike storage or maintenance facilities, no incentives for parking cash outs or other things that other large employers have, like Google, have worked on here in Boulder. No real promise or discussion of first, last mile kilometer connections to Arapahoe or other 55th Street. And again, you made brief mention of those, but again, looking at the written material as submitted, it's disappointing. And speaking to everyone else's point, there are no trip capture strategies such as cafeterias, other on-site amenities that could reduce trips in and out of the site and in the park during the day. And it is known that there is a large exodus of people in and out of the park in their cars to go over to Wendy's or whatever. People don't walk out of Flatiron Court and walk over to Wendy's. They get in their car and they drive. So it's disappointing in that regard. And I want to partly blame this on maybe it's your selection of consultant. LSC Engineering, and I'm calling them out by name because I've tried to do this subtly in the past. they use a template that focuses on a 2011 document, a draft of a TDM toolkit that was never adopted. It is meaning, it's like any other proposal that comes before this board, city council, and it didn't get adopted. It's not adopted, and it is treated by LSC Engineering as code, and it is quoted as code. And it is annoying as all hell to have them do that application after application after application. So I've been on here almost 2 years, and it is persistent and it is troubling. So the city has a TDM code. That TDM code is kind of vague. It's not particularly robust, but it provides an opportunity for flexibility and creativity, which is, if you talk to developers, oh, gee, cut us loose. You know, we'll be innovative, we'll be creative, we'll do the right thing. You know what? Yes, do the right thing. And that involves being creative, forward thinking, and really looking at ways to cut parking, to encourage different modes, you know, beyond RTD eco passes, which, you know, we can talk about RTD problems all night. So I'm encouraging you, do not come back here for a site review with a weak, uncreative, boilerplate TDM plan. It won't work with me, but I'm only speaking for me. So that's my input on your TDM plans.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be brief and not repeat what my colleagues have said. I want to point out in the packet, staff had some comments on, I think it was page 70, and I particularly agreed with their comments about the multi-use path and site circulation. And it's good to hear that the applicant is already thinking about how to incorporate some of those changes that staff requested. And then also, again, this idea of the ground floor should include some commercial uses for the benefit of on-site employees and those in the surrounding area, such as cafes or small stores. So I want to uplift those comments by staff, which I totally agree with. And I will leave it there. I'm not an expert on site design. I will say that it does have a very industrial feel, which is completely consistent with the use that you have proposed, which is a very industrial research, forward-thinking kind of use. And so I thought ML's comments about human scaled, if we are intending this to be evolving into more of a neighborhood, that the Flatirons Business Park will not be just a business park, but will be a place that people live and play, that maybe the feel of the buildings might look a little bit different. But again, I'm not a designer and I don't think I can dictate design, but it's just a thought. Thank you.
Thanks. Kurt.
Okay, thank you. I'll call out a couple of things that I would like to cheer in this. First of all, I liked the simplicity of the materiality and the consistency. The particular material of Corten, maybe we can have discussion about, although it's fine by me, maybe not all the board would be that happy with it, but we get a lot of proposals that are just really busy and use, you know, I was walking down the street the other day and looking at a relatively new project in Boulder, and I counted 8, I think, different materials on the facade that was visible to me. And it was just way too much in my particular view. So I really appreciate that, the simplicity of the materiality in particular. I also appreciate your consideration of the connection to the South Boulder Creek path. That obviously is super important. I spent many years working in Flatiron Park at 5775 Flatiron Park, which may be one that you own. And I would use this muddy, rocky connection to South Boulder Creek path all the time, every time I was going south. And so I will be very appreciative, as will lots of other people in the Flatiron Park, when that is a year-round, safe, nice connection. So I really appreciate your attention to that. In terms of the site design, I don't find that this drive completely encircling the site is very successful. And I think ML alluded to this, it seems like it results in an awful lot of extra pavement that isn't really getting us a lot. And more impervious surface. And it sort of makes it feel a little bit like, I don't know, a Target or something where there's just pavement on all the sides. And so I would encourage you to think about if there are alternative vehicular access designs that can get motor vehicles in and out more quickly without messing up the pedestrian environment too much, but get them on the site, get them out of the way, and then let the rest be pedestrian and very much focused on the first floor, as ML was talking about, and with good bicycle connections and so on. And the human scale, I think, is great. Just to follow up on Mark's points about the TDM, I totally agree. And I would certainly urge you to think about a greater parking reduction if you can, and certainly using what we call the SUMP principle: shared, unbundled, managed, and priced. And I think that all of that probably will be required when you come back at site review. It's something that is pretty important to us. The last thing I'll say is I was out there trespassing and walking around the existing
Not drinking. Not drinking.
and getting lots of beers at the same time. And probably this doesn't work, but that existing, especially the larger existing building, that is one solid building. And, which is typical of, the Ma Bell era. They built some damn good buildings. And so I don't know if there's any chance of possibly being able to reuse that in some particular way. Obviously, that would be a completely different site plan, but just something to think about, because there's a lot of embodied carbon in there, and it's kind of a cool building in a very, industrial kind of a way. And that is it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the third question is, are there other issues that planning board members would like to bring up? And I'm going to call on myself first. I have 3 items. One is I really urge the city to push applicants to bring us more comprehensive concept plans. It's kind of hard to respond to things that are pretty vague. And I think the comments that have been made today are really interesting, and would have been even more so and even more thoughtful if we'd had a somewhat more specific plan to respond to. And I realize there's a fine balance there. I understand. Secondly, I think we need, this is, I think, again, pointed towards city staff. The fact that one type of developer owns a large number of buildings in this one area, and that developer only does one thing, may preempt our ability to produce the thing we say we want out of the East Boulder sub-community plan. And I know it is our process that we have to respond to what is submitted, and the landowner gets to submit what they want to submit. But I think the point of an area plan is to try to get ahead of that. And we may have given a little too much leeway in this particular area plan by offering suggestions rather than trying to limit or require certain kinds of development in certain areas. So you would have to provide housing. So the applicant is doing what the applicant's going to do. But, and I'm looking at the city staff about this, I really feel like we've semi-shot ourselves in the foot here. And I think that's we might have lost a real opportunity. And thirdly, this is about the essential that the wetlands be protected in this area. And I think as I read the proposal, it seems like it is, but I just wanted to put a little flag in the ground there about this. Mark.
So Sarah, what you said is really about how we honor and implement an area plan when we have someone that owns half of the park that does one thing. And that does present a challenge. And I think that on the other hand, it presents an opportunity to have the applicant come to the city, us, council, everyone, with rather than this building's concept review, this building's site review, to share with us their plans for or partnering with other developers to create housing, to create other restaurant and amenities and so forth. And maybe it's not in the ground floor of this one building, but if the applicant raises their hand and says, yeah, but we're doing it across the street, we're doing it 500 feet away at this other site, we're working with the owner of this other building to do the things to fulfill the East Boulder subcommunity plan and their goals. So anyway, I would encourage you to think, I understand, as you said, applicants do what applicants do, and we have a code, and we try to get everyone to meet the code, and life goes on. But I think a broad view by both the city and applicants to encourage fulfillment of the plan would be great. And that's all I have to say on item 3.
Go ahead, Laura.
So I really agree with everything that Sarah and Mark just said. When we were doing the East Boulder subcommunity plan, the fear was if we allowed residential in this area, developers would snap it up and build it all out as pure residential because that was seen as the highest and best and most profitable use of this land. And what we're finding is that, well, there are some developers who would like to use it for something else because they have a portfolio and a model and clients who want something else, which I totally get. So I want to just echo what Mark said, which is I do think this is an opportunity. And if the applicant is interested in considering it, one of the issues with trying to convert industrial land into a mixed use neighborhood is, well, who goes first? And if you're just one little piece of property owner, there's a fear that you could hang yourself out there, build some residential, and then nobody follows suit. And then you don't have a neighborhood, you have an isolated housing development in an industrial park, and that doesn't sell very well. But because you own so much land here, you have the opportunity to roll these projects one after the other and make your own neighborhood. And I appreciated your comments earlier from the applicant that you really want to work with the city to try to have your vision and also help fulfill the city's vision. And the city's vision here really is a mixed use area. It's not to keep it purely industrial, even though we love life sciences and we understand the value of that. And that is a wonderful thing. And we have approved many beautiful life sciences buildings. We like that use. But this particular area of town, we're hoping will evolve into something that maybe includes that and becomes more than that. So I do think you have a real opportunity here to help build something that fulfills your vision and your needs and also helps fulfill the city's needs. Because you do own so much property, you can really make this happen. So again, I just want to encourage that kind of thinking if that's something you're open to. Thank you.
I think all that was very well said, and I have nothing to add.
Yes, it was all very well said, but I am going to add one thing. Sorry, Kurt. I love that Sarah started by turning it back sort of on staff. It's like we go through all of this to create this amazing sub-community plan. And we have not, and we know this, right? We have not yet put in place all the implementation of it, whatever the zoning and whatever things will follow that will kind of persuade the development in particular direction. But I think that this is a really important conversation and that we shouldn't lose sight of as we go through the reviews and as we maybe engage, as Mark was suggesting, with the bigger landowners, as to what we really want and how we want this to go. And let's find our way toward being able to manifest what we put forth in the East Boulder subcommunity plan sooner rather than later. We've done all that work, and I would like to see that it can start having an impact, and it looks like we may not have the tools for that yet.
All right, thank you all very much. Thanks to the applicant for spending a couple of hours with us. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we will pick up the next item, public hearing item. We're supposed to fly home. Laura, you have to go around to the front door or back. We can open this door for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you guys sticking around? You going back to? Gone. Is he a native? Gone.
You're
from
Nevada. She knows she went to the ladies' room.
Oh, there's one up here.
And no, there's one right there. Okay, teams, are we all ready to go? Excellent. All right, we're now gonna come to the second public hearing item, agenda title, Public Hearing and Recommendations to City Council regarding proposed ordinance 8600, amending Title 9 Land Use Code BRC 1981 by repealing Chapter 914 Residential Growth Management System and deleting all references thereto and setting forth related details. We set aside maximum of 45 minutes for this. 10 or so minutes, 15 minutes. Carl's going to give us a presentation, and then we can ask questions, and then we can vote. And I will say that all I brought with me was my one pager. So at some point, I'm going to ask you to put the recommended language up on the screen. Take it away.
Okay, good evening, board members. I'm Carl Geiler with Planning and Development Services. Before you tonight is Ordinance 8600. Sarah read the title of the ordinance, which relates to repealing the city's residential growth management system in light of state legislation on the matter. We had brought this up to City Council earlier this year, and they had advised us to move forward with an ordinance to repeal this section of our land use code. So the purpose of tonight is for Planning Board to hold a public hearing on this ordinance, deliberate on the ordinance, and then make a recommendation to City Council. So it is set for City Council public hearing on January 18th in 2024. So the question for Planning Board tonight is, does Planning Board agree that the city's residential growth management system should be repealed in response to the Colorado House Bill 23-1255? So just going into a little bit of history on the residential growth management system. It kind of grew out of the Danish plan, which was something that was from the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan when it was enacted in the late 70s. So that's 1976. The Danish plan was really a merit-based way of managing how much the city can grow. And then it ended up being codified within the city's land use code in 1982. So there's been several iterations of that since the 1980s. Whether or not.
Plugged into staff 1 and 2. That HDMI. Oh, are you in present mode on PowerPoint?
I am, yeah.
Oh, weird. Sorry. Well, I'll share on Zoom here, and you might have to tell me just when to swap slides. It was just working with Allison, so.
Was it showing and then not showing?
No, it never showed.
Oh, okay.
I feel like we should put up one of those after midnight signs where it's just like a nuclear war sign.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Well, those are mine. So.
All right, can you see it or?
Yeah, we can see it.
With your notes, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
All right, so you're advancing them now?
Oh, yes, I am.
Okay.
Sorry. You'll have to tell me next. Sorry, Carl.
Next slide, please. So I was just giving a little bit of history of the residential growth management system. So you might have heard of the Danish plan. So that's what I was talking about. That was enacted in 1976. It was a merit-based program, and then that was changed in the early 80s when we added Chapter 914 to the land use code. So there's actually been a number of different iterations
of RGMS over time. The latest one was adopted in 2000. So basically, the essence of the program is that it limits residential growth by 1% of existing housing stock per year. So the purpose is to control growth in a way that assures the preservation of Boulder's unique environment, high quality of life, and availability of public facilities and urban services. So you'll see the BVCP policy that relates to growth management. The city uses a number of different ways to manage growth through the urban growth boundary annexation policies, Area 1, Area 2, but also RGMS. So before any applicant can get a building permit for any residential unit, they do have to submit for a growth allocation. So that has to be approved before that permit will get issued. And that's still in process. So there's typically about 400 allocations per year that are allotted. And that equates to roughly the 1% of the current housing stock, which is over 40,000 dwelling units today. This program was originally enacted to largely react to greenfield development that was occurring in the late 70s, a lot of single family homes. I think it was a bit of a shock to see some of the large developments, after Martin Acres and Park East and that kind of development that led to the system. So obviously today we're seeing more infill and different types of housing types and single family homes. Next slide, please. So bringing us to current day, the Colorado legislature is obviously focused on increasing housing inventory in the state in response to the housing crisis that we're seeing nationwide, especially here in Boulder. They've brought through a number of different bills. Some were unsuccessful, but one that was related to growth management systems. They called them, they're defined in their bill as anti-growth laws, but it does point at residential growth management systems. So obviously that impacts Boulder. It also impacts Golden and Lakewood that have similar systems that cap the growth at 1% per year. So they're actually, we've corresponded with them. They're in the process of doing the same, of repealing their residential growth management systems. So the law is intended basically to remove zoning barriers to housing. That's the key part of it. It was adopted in May and went into effect on August 6th of this year. Next slide, please. So one thing to understand is that over the years in Boulder, since 2000, obviously desired housing types in the city wanted to remove barriers to the desired housing types, such as permanently affordable housing, mixed uses, CU housing, any projects that have more than 35% of their housing units as permanently affordable. These were all desirable uses. So when the 2000 RGMS ordinance was adopted, there were a number of exemptions that were put into the code where these do not count against the 1% limit. It's only those uses that don't contribute to these goals. So like, single family homes or not mixed use projects, anything again associated with more like greenfield development would count against that 1%. So this is a summary table that we have in the memo. This is a kind of a simplified version that also includes some new data from 2023, which we didn't have the memo on, but you'll see that the total number of housing units has been growing from 46,000 up to over 47,000. You can see the housing growth rate per year floats around 1%. You can see 2023, it goes over 1%, which is not uncommon. That's happened in the past. Again, that's including all the non-exempt and exempt. That's all housing units. When we look at what counts against RGMX, we call that excess or non-exempt. So those are the numbers of ones that would count against that 1%. So you can see that percentage is much lower than the 1%. That's what's not allowed to go over 1%.
Just a clarifying question. Are these housing units approved or completed and given residency certificates?
They're approved.
Okay, just approved, not necessarily built. Okay.
Yeah, we had some data in the memo that had like housing constructed and everything. That's what counts into the total growth rate, but I didn't have that on this summary table. It's just a lot of numbers.
All right, thank you.
But just basically showing that we're well under the 1% when we look at how our GMS is being implemented. But even if we didn't have the program, the market is floating around 1% anyway. So that's the point we wanted to make. So next slide, please. So based on that, we're recommending that Planning Board recommend the City Council repealing Chapter 914, the reasons we have listed up on the slide. So the ordinance would make Boulder consistent with the new state law. Limiting housing growth is contrary to the city's housing goals and policies, especially amid the housing crisis that we're in. Obviously, it's hitting Boulder particularly hard. RGMS requires significant staff and applicant time while having little actual impact on limiting growth at this point. RGMS is largely outdated since most development has shifted to infill development and away from single family housing that kind of prompted the creation of the program. So we're recommending that Planning Board make a recommendation to council to repeal it. So next slide shows the motion language for Planning Board, and that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, Kurt, do you have any questions? ML, do you have any questions? Mark has questions.
Yeah. As I read one of the only, one of the great things in 914, I forget, I wrote it down somewhere. Hang on just one second. 914(1) little c, it states that this allows us to assure that such growth proceeds in an orderly manner and does not exceed the availability of public facilities and urban services. That seems eminently reasonable and not anti-growth, but just simply that. So my question is, if that seems reasonable, by eliminating all of 914, including our ability to assure that growth is orderly and does not exceed the availability of public services, are we proposing any way somewhere else in the code, or do we already have somewhere else in the code that allows us to control for availability of public services and controlling and directing growth in an orderly manner?
I mean, I think our sense of it is that we implement zoning that's based on the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. The comprehensive plan gets updated, every 5 years. That's when we really take a look at, having orderly development and where are the growth areas, and then setting the policy for those areas, and that trickles down into the zoning. So we feel that it is addressed.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's measured against our utilities planning to ensure that we have concurrency between water, sewer, stormwater against our growth projections.
Okay, given water availability, and I don't succumb to the idea that, oh my God, Boulder is on the precipice of running out of water. We could water a lot less grass and shower a lot more people. But do we have the ability sometime in the future where we have either we can't treat the water, Batasso is limited by some measure, or northern water? There's many scenarios that I can't quite envision, but I can think that, gee, there could be some scenario under which we have to limit services. And so by eliminating this entirely, do we have some mechanism, should we need to limit based on real limitations in service, to be able to do that?
Again, I think that's something that would shake out as part of the BVCP update and coordination with utilities. If they did find something that was concerning, it would either have to factor into the capital improvements updates of having to upgrade certain lines to facilitate that or potentially put in limitations that would avoid it. I think our argument is that, at this point in time, RGMS has become somewhat inconsequential because it's floating around that 1%. And also, with the number of, we expect that the housing will continue, with market rate conditions, providing housing, and that a lot of those are going to be in mixed use developments anyway that would be exempt from RGMS. So we're not seeing a major impact of repealing it.
And I think we're of the mind that the comp plan land use planning that we do is a much better control mechanism for controlling growth and the type of growth and ensuring that concurrency with services that we provide, particularly with our, the concepts around annexation that, we won't provide services unless you annex into the city. And so I think that tool still remains far superior than what it is that Carl described tonight, and kind of limiting growth that has a lot of exceptions that have been written into it over the years to help encourage the type of units that we've wanted to see.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question. It's not the question I asked you yesterday. It's a different question. Could we go back to the language of the state legislation?
Sure. Can you?
Or could we go back to the state?
This one?
Yeah. So I don't know what the language exactly was, but if the law is intended to remove zoning and land use barriers to new housing units, what door does that open to Boulder's zoning and land use code? I mean, I realize what we're doing is we're voting on eliminating this one particular residential growth management system. But does the law that was passed by the state open a door to pressure to change, to eliminate zoning?
I don't think we've interpreted it that way. I think it's pretty explicit what needs to be stripped out of zoning. But obviously there are things happening at the state level now where they're looking at targeted areas of local law related to land use that might have to be changed. But we think in our interpretation of the bill, it was very specific to this type of zoning.
Okay. And does this in any way undermine our arguments for home rule?
There we go. So the arguments for home rule, this is something that we have been talking about previously to this and just in the adoption process for the legislation. Does it undermine our home rule argument? And the answer is no, we can still make a home rule argument if city council were to decide that they want to keep our residential growth management system, for example, then they could argue a home rule argument saying that home rule is a matter of local control. This is one of those areas that since we are not using it as much as we saw by the percentages, that we may not want to challenge, or we may or may not want to challenge at some point in the future, or there may be some other bills that are out there that we would want to challenge under a home rule argument saying that this is something that we don't agree with and want to challenge.
But we're not undermining our ability to use those arguments in the future by passing this particular very limited
That's correct.
Piece of language. Okay.
Yeah, we can still make that argument.
Okay. Any more questions?
We still have the public.
Oh yeah,
hearing too.
public comment. Sorry. Do we have public comment? Is Lynn on the line?
Well, double check Zoom. Let's see. If anyone is participating online, please
Lynn
raise your
Siegel
hand.
has raised her hand.
Yes,
can see
thank
it right
you. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can share the timer. Lynn, you should be able to unmute and speak.
The state government limiting our ability to resist growth in any way. So whatever you need to do about this situation to improve our home rule opportunities, that's what I would want you to do. I don't want growth imposed on Boulder from other communities or us to impose growth from our community to others in any way. I think it's our business, how we grow. And I think that we're doing a lot of counterintuitive things in Boulder, like we just increased our population by 30,000 with CU South and another 30,000 with our occupancy laws. And we're in an inelastic market where it doesn't matter what we do to constrain growth, it's going to come anyway. So all we do is increase our population and make it more unlivable here and drive up the cost of everything. So those are my feelings on the subject of growth. And that, I mean, you always hear from me that what we need to do is stop subsidizing these developers like tonight. There should have been no parking, not giving them any, they should have to have the full amount of parking that we require, the 500 spaces. They shouldn't have a height limit reduction. They shouldn't get any of these perks to grow in our community and cause greater imbalance in our jobs housing balance. And that impairs our economic, our thriving economy. It impairs it. So we need to do something that makes this place, as if it's at all possible, more affordable. And we're doing exactly the opposite in most of our policies, in my view. And that's just me, but it's an inelastic market. I mean, these things are so obvious, and yet there's still all these subsidies.
All right, thank you, Lynn, very much. Thank you. All right, could someone put the language for the, wait, did you?
I've got it here.
Okay,
Okay.
could you
Okay.
also put up
Okay.
just,
I was ready to make a motion. Go ahead.
all right, it's been a while since I've done this. I have to read the motion. I have to read the motion first and then
The
someone makes the
maker
motion.
The motion maker would
All
make
right,
the motion, read the motion.
Mark would like to make the motion.
I move.
No, I'm just-
You're on a time frame. I'm just trying to help
I'm
out.
just
so.
laughing at myself for not remembering how to do any of this stuff.
It's
Uh,
your cold.
It's my cold.
I struggled under this cold, so I sympathize completely. Okay, I move that Planning Board recommends that City Council adopt Ordinance 8600, amending Title 9, Land Use Code, BRC 1981, by repealing Chapter 9-14, Residential Growth Management System, and deleting all references thereto, and setting forth related details.
And I'll second.
Any comments?
I fully support. I think staff made a very compelling case that the state may have suggested this to us and we agree with it. And by going ahead and repealing this, we are not giving up any of our ability to argue in court for any reason about our home rule powers. So I have no problem supporting this fully.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
And yeah, I'll agree. And I'll just point out that looking at the actual code of the state law. It does have a little bit of an escape clause if of allowing in the event of a disaster emergency, or I don't understand this part, so Laura would have to explain it, but something about extending or acquiring public infrastructure, public services, or water resources. It allows for a growth cap under extenuating circumstances for up to 24 months in a 5-year period. So there is actually a little bit of flexibility built in. So I fully support changing this for the reasons that staff described and Laura reiterated, but it does have a little bit of flexibility written into the law. So I just want to point that out.
All right.
I'll just simply say, the only thing I'll miss from this is many times talking to my fellow Boulderites, I'm confronted with oh my God, Boulder is exploding. Things are out of control. It's chaos. And we're building everywhere. We're building hundreds of units every year, thousands. And it's like, do you know, Boulder, we have this plan and it is, controls growth to 1%. And we haven't hit that in the last, X number of years. I'll miss the ability to,
Sure
to
you'll
say
come up
that.
with I'm sure you'll come up with a way to make your case.
There you go.
All right, you want to reiterate the motion?
Okay, reread. You want me to reread the motion? Okay. Okay. Planning Board recommends that City Council adopt Ordinance 8600, amending Title IX Land Use Code, BRC 1981 by repealing Chapter 9-14 Residential Growth Management System and deleting all references thereto and setting forth related details.
Laura?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Sarah, I, ML?
Yes.
And Kurt?
Yes.
All right, the motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Carl. Really appreciate it. One of the few times you get out of here, you don't have to sit here for 3 hours.
Nicely done, Carl.
Hi, all right, now we have matters, I see, we're missing our planning director. Our director of planning, he's not here. Charles, do you have anything for us?
No, there's no matters from staff tonight.
Okay, is there anything from our attorney? Is there anything from board members? Yes, go ahead, Kurt.
I have something, but it might be more of a Brad question, and I'm sorry, I had it written down and I didn't bring that scrap of paper. But it related to the schedule for the Boulder Valley Comp Plan update. And the very final stage is in the spring of 2026.
6. You're probably right, 6.
6, right after a new council comes in. So I just had a little concern about that because it kind of feels like people are going to be spending basically almost 2 years working on all of 2025 basically, and some time before and a little time afterwards working on this. And then the new council is going to be seated and it sort of feels like they're going to be told, hey, we've been working on this thing, please approve it. And which it just seems like it puts it in a weird situation. So I was just wondering I guess the question is, what was the rationale for that? And if consideration had been given to try to push up the final approval so that it was done by the council that had been working on it all that time.
That's very thoughtful feedback. I'll pass that along to Brad and Christopher Johnson. I'm sure they'll be happy to follow up.
Thank you very much.
ML, did you have?
I do. I have a question, given the conversation we had earlier. So the first is, when is the zoning and code update to reflect the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan? What is the timing on that?
So we have just retained a consultant who is starting to scratch the surface on drafting form-based code. So it'll be sometime in, I think, late 2024.
Is that, would that be the mechanism that would have put in place the requirement for housing or mixed use onto the project, like, for example, as we saw tonight?
Possibly. I think it depends on how it's drafted. I think the form-based code is really, I think it's less about uses and more just about the physical manifestation of how the properties redevelop.
Right.
And the plan does talk about striking a balance in the light industrial areas of housing and preserving existing light industrial while encouraging the right types of, R&D, life science, light industrial uses. So there is still a balance that I think we need to strike. I don't know that there'll be a zoning code that comes back and says everything in industrial has to be housing.
Right.
But as we start advancing the implementation mechanisms for East Boulder through the form-based code process, that feedback will be helpful. I think this is one of the first projects we're seeing come in
Right.
in one of those area typologies. So
Can I just follow up on that? How would language codify the balance? Like what kind of language would codify a balance between light industrial uses?
well, that's what the area plan says. Is that what
I know, but
well, we implement that through either the site review process or the form-based code process where we're balancing all of those interests. And again, reasonable people can disagree on that. If the board doesn't feel like we're striking that balance, then
right. But to Mark's point, we're seeing it, and this is a challenge of the way we do business, which is we see it project by project. And so we could get through 24 projects before we're able to effectively argue that the balance has not been met. And then the last guy through the door on project 25 is told, sorry, it's got to be residential. I mean, so my question is really, what kind of language can take that next step from here's our big vision to here is what we want to see?
I think you would need to draft that into the zoning code then in the form-based
Right.
code so that it's reflected in the use tables that you want a certain percentage of, industrial in, or X percentage of industrial across, X zone district. So there's ways to do it. It's just making sure.
Is this a conversation that the consultant has on their radar?
It will be after today.
I mean,
I can assure you of that.
I think noting that we've got one developer that owns 24 properties and they specialize only in one type of building. That kind of, I think, raises the concern of, well, why do we have an East Boulder sub-community plan if we can't implement it?
Can I make a suggestion or an observation? So when we were doing the East Boulder sub-community plan, like I said, we expected that people were going to try to buy up all this land and build 100% residential. And because of that, in the place types, we put requirements that on the ground floor, you had to have mixed use, that residential would not be allowed on the ground floor in some areas. And perhaps we can invert that logic and say, for some of these upper floors, it has to be residential in some of these areas. That could be done just as easily as saying the ground floor cannot be residential, I would think. So that's one idea.
It also wouldn't be uncommon after on the heels of adopting an area plan, as you start figuring out your implementation mechanisms, that there may be changes to the plan that you have to make as you figure out how to implement it. So there may be changes that go along with the East Boulder sub-community plan that help effectuate some more practical implementation as we learn more, about writing zoning for the area.
So I interrupted you. You had.
Well, I feel like we have had a very productive meeting because it put this kind of little flag onto the future of the evolution of that area. And, it's always both shocking and interesting when we come upon this sort of debacle that, hey, we've got a plan, but we don't have any means to implement it. So let's hurry up and get our next step done. So
Again, I
thank you,
think
Charles.
to Laura's point, I think the natural fear was that residential was going to take over everything. So I think that's the policy direction that made its way into the plan.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you. I'm glad it's forefront on our mind.
All right, anything else? All right, then this meeting is concluded at 8:40. Congratulations, everyone.
And it's nice to see you again, Sarah. I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you, and I
hope
hope you
everybody
feel
has
better
a
too.
safe and healthy